This is a journey into sound. A journey which along the way will bring to you new color, new dimension, new value, and a new experience.
Welcome to the Ghee Spot podcast. I'm your guide, Katie Silcox, bringing you your weekly self-love soundbite. Join us for conversations around sex, spirit, and all things self-care. All things self-care. All things self-care.
This is a journey into sound.
Uno, dos, tres, cuatro.
You are a Ghee Spot podcast with Katie Silcox.
Okay, I want to just dive in a little bit into lecture this morning, and then we're going to have Liz lead us through a movement, and then we're going to end with some more practice and meditation and some journaling type stuff. So we're going to move sooner than later this morning. How are you guys doing and feeling? Yeah, a little more settled into Charlottesville? Awesome. Me too. I had a dream last night where I was like racing through a mountain. It's interesting to note your dreams during these good witch gatherings. And I was racing through the mountains. I may have been on some sort of moped or rollerblading situation. It wasn't good. I'm not meant to do that. And I called Liz and I was like, Liz, I forgot about Shakti school. She's like, I know, we're all here waiting on you, and I can hear the music in the background. And I was like, I'm on my way, and I'm running, right? And below is like the mother of all potholes. It was like full of like crystals and stuff. It was like this immense, huge pothole. And as I was on the phone with Liz, I just like, I'm on my way. And I just hit the pothole with my head, head first into the pothole. And then I woke up. So there's a lot there for me to unpack today. So on that note, Aphrodite. Less doing, more being. All of us are the daughters of an inheritance from our foremothers and forefathers. This inheritance can be biological, this inheritance can be emotional, this inheritance can be cultural and sociological. We're all inheriting this experience of being human from someone else. And we've inherited many gifts from our foremothers and forefathers. And we can't forget about that when we begin to study reality and unpack this inheritance. And the great gift of one of the great gifts of our foremothers is something called feminism. I don't know if you've heard of it. And there are different waves of feminism, and some say we're living this third or even fourth wave of feminism. And this inheritance of feminism is so great. Like, yay. Like, we, at least on paper, are equal. At least on paper, right? And we can vote, and we can own property. Imagine that. And we are not the chattel of our husband. In other words, we're not the property of our husband anymore. And if you look at the history of humanity, you guys, if you look at the entire history of humanity, let's say from the time we used to worship in a pagan way or worship the goddess to now, that history whereby women aren't the property of men, if this is the book, these are the last 3 pages. So don't forget how new it is. In the 1970s, women got divorced at astounding rates when it suddenly, with the second wave of feminism, became okay to leave your husband. In the 1950s, it was way, way taboo. So even this idea of marriage, right, being something that you can leave, even newer if we were to look at the book of our history. So I just want us to stop and remember, like, how much we owe to our foremothers, that we're really fighting for that for us. And then, of course, you know the story. We got to be able to leave the men that maybe we didn't need to be with. We got to have birth control. We were able to exert a lot more agency over our life as a woman. And that is a cause to celebrate and defend. The woman's power to choose what she does with her life and her life force. So in that inheritance from beautiful aspects of feminism, we also inherited some not so great things. Why? What happened? Well, the feminists were really her, right? I can do anything a man can do. Remember Rosie the Riveter? That's her! That is Athena, Durga. And we celebrate that. Yes, of course you can. And guess what? She did. Bonnie can tell you, I'm really bad at changing a car tire. And so, you know, there's an aspect of this that we lost power when we were able to do everything. So what feminism did, and what it's now, I think, in many circles, including this one, healing, is to realize that what feminism did is really say, I can activate the psychic vortex, the archetype of the masculine in me. I can do anything a man can do. And in order for me to become a part of the company that I work for in a way where I get respect, I'm going to have to claw my way to the top as a woman. If you've been in the industry, corporate world, even now, it's not the same for a woman as a man. And if you want to make it in Silicon Valley, or you want to make it on Wall Street, or really anywhere in the corporate world, there is a certain masculization of your body, in all your bodies, consciousness, that you have to do. And so in the 1980s, the women put on the shoulder pads. Yes. And what is that? That is, broad shoulders are masculine. This is a biological reality. If there were 50 men in here, by and large, they would have bigger shoulders than the rest of us. And so we put on the shoulder pads and we went to work, right? And so then what women began to realize is, wait a minute, I am doing all these things that men can do, and I'm doing it sometimes even better than them. But there is a part of me that is dying. There's a part of me that is frozen or asleep because it can never die. And so that part of me is what the feminists left behind, and even to our detriment, demonized to a certain extent. In other words, certain streams, if you will, of feminism actually did as much to harm the feminine psyche as men did or patriarchy did. So when we talk about our inheritance, we have to also talk about the inheritance that we've gotten from women as well as men. The other inheritance that we have is something called, I'm sure you've heard of this buzzword, the patriarchy. The patriarchy has some really beautiful aspects to it. And I think if we simply think feminism's good and women are the future, that t-shirt is actually really polarizing. It may have a good intention, but you know what? I don't want to lay railroad track. I don't want to build skyscrapers. Even if they start building them in a more feminine way where they're circular instead of so phallic. I don't want to do that. We deny our patriarchal roots and our masculine beloveds when we take that from them. The masculine, normally it's men, or a woman who identifies more with her masculine, are really good at doing certain things that enable you to sit in the bubble bath with roses and eat chocolate. I don't want to figure out how to run internet wire. I figured that out very quickly with that thing. So the patriarchal inheritance is valid. It has gifts and it has wounds. And the biggest wound, I believe, for us as a sistership and a priestesshood is this word, priestess, is that there was a time prior to the takeover of Christendom and the patriarchy whereby it was very common in Egypt and all of these different places, India, go to Khajuraho, you'll see this, where there were working priestesses. And a part of the priestesshood was a reverence for and a celebration of and a practice around sexuality and sensuality and motherhood and loverhood. And those women were highly revered. Why? Because of this one thing called Eros. E-R-O-S, in case you don't know that word. Eros, erotic. The ancient, pre-patriarchal ancient tradition understood something about the feminine in men and women, but largely more in women, the feminine's power to inspire through the vehicle of her body's expression. We're going to get to see some of that later on in ourselves and others. There are certain women, and priestesses held very different roles, right? But some of them were temple dancers, and some of them were prostitutes. And so there is this archetype inside all of us that you identify with more or less called the sacred prostitute. That word, when we hear it in our Western patriarchal psychology, when I say sacred prostitute, it is highly likely, unless you've done a lot of work around this, it is highly likely that your psyche will not like to hear it. Your psyche will go, no. Your psyche will say something is bad there. So if you already had that reaction, great. You're seeing that is an inheritance. So what we are thinking about this week in terms of our ojas is this reclaiming of parts of our psyche that have been rejected, abandoned, frozen in space and time. And it may be in this lifetime, but more likely it's your lineage of all your mothers. So this idea of a sacred prostitute, this idea of a sexual priestess, when you put those two words together, the Western psyche is going to not like it. So what happened? We've inherited this belief system whereby our sensuality, our sexuality, ergo our body, our sensations in our body, our menstruation, our birthing, our emotions, our sensing capacities, our relational capacities, where all of those things have been divorced from God. And if you don't like that word, that's fine. Goddess. And if you don't like that word, that's fine. The sacred, the infinite, the higher self. It's been divorced. And in that divorce is where all of our wounding is for both you guys and our men. They are suffering as much as you are. If you don't know it, go down here tonight and walk around and look at them. And there's a bar down there with 700 TVs and 65 different beer, whatever they're called, taps, where they can go and get their pacifier and become sedated. So these psychic archetypes that we've abandoned inside of ourselves affect us all. And as you guys do this work this week, when you reawaken it and you help your brother and your sister reawaken it when you leave. I'll tell you stories about how that may show up. For me, it has, and you can take it out. So here's a quote from a book that I wanted to bring down and I forgot, but I'll bring it down later, called, don't ask me the author, but just look it up. I don't remember her name. The Sacred Prostitute. And she's a Jungian analyst. And I want to bring a quote from her into the room. This is so amazing. It sounds very it makes me feel very smart to say it. So we'll parse it out. So she says, when an archetype is constellated, so in other words, when a part of your being that we all share is constellated, means activated, honored, owned, loved on, utilized, expressed. When an archetype inside of me, one of these multitudes of goddesses, is constellated, it releases that specific energy. And our consciousness recognizes it. And it is felt through the body as emotion. Jung says when that inner loss of the vital feminine that we've been discussing all morning, when that vital loss of the feminine happens, it gives rise, Jung says, to the frightful discontent in a culture. Yeah. So I'll say both of them. When an archetype, when one of these goddesses are constellated or activated in you, it releases this specific energy of her. This is pure Tantra. Tantra says if you want the goddess to show up in your life, become her, own her, embody her. And it is recognized by our higher brain. And it is felt in the body as the emotion, soma. And then Jung says, and here's the flip side, the loss of this vital feminine force, Aphrodite, the sacred priestess, the one who owns her sexuality and makes it a holy, holy ground. When we lose that, it gives rise to the frightful discontent in our culture, in men and women. So what happened was the church said, this feminine thing, y'all, way too powerful. So let's see, how are we going to control everybody? Because if they love on their body and they are in this realm of the priestess, whereby the natural innate beauty and delight of a moving woman and a birthing woman and a creative woman, where that alone has the power to inspire men to seek God. Let me read that again. I didn't read it, but let me find it where I wrote it. The woman dancing in the temple was an erotic expression of the thing that inspires communication in a man between his body and his soul. Now you can switch the words around. It could be a man, and Liz knows that, right? Yoni, the belly dancer man here in town. It doesn't have anything to do with having female parts.
Will you say that again?
Yeah, the woman dancing in the temple, her erotic expression is the thing that inspires communication in a man between his body and his soul. So the church was like, dude, no. Because then who has some power? These guys. I'm going to say another one. I'm getting ahead of myself, but it's just too juicy. Imagine this, you guys. Put this on and wear it for a minute. What if our feminine humanity, what if the fact that we birth, the fact that we menstruate, the fact that we have orgasms, the fact that we long, the fact that we have fear, the fact that we're terrified sometimes and afraid and alone and depressed, all of this vast spectrum of our darkness and our light, our joy and our fear, what if that natural humanity was the fuel of our God-seeking? So that didn't work. And so, because then, you don't need anyone else to be the intermediary between you and God. So I believe it's still very much alive in religion today and very much alive in yoga and New Age culture today, is this idea that you need an intermediary. When the priestess tradition says, the Holy Spirit is alive in you and very much activated through the energy of Eros. And we all know it. And it has nothing to do with sexual penetration between a man and a woman. It has everything to do with when I let God be masculine. This is another problem in the yoga goddess witchy world. When you deny God as masculine, you are misunderstanding tantric alchemy. When I open my heart to being filled by the divine masculine, what that means is that I get to become the feminine. So if you're a woman who's like, dude, I am so ready to step in. How many of you are interested in, I really want to step into my feminine side, my soft side, my vulnerable side, my easeful side, my creative side, right? It's everybody. By doing this and becoming an empty vessel, which is what a womb is, your anatomy supports this, he gets to fill you. And what it does in terms of archetypes in the brain is it says this masculine gets to penetrate you, and therefore you get to be filled and you get to be the feminine. So just something to throw out there. I'm not telling y'all how to worship, but I'm saying for me that was really powerful. Goddess, by the way, y'all all got her. Indu said this to me. I don't know if she said this. I think she may have said this to, maybe not to you guys in the training, but I remember talking to Indu on the phone one day, and she said to me, because I was struggling with this idea of the goddess and leaving my father's house. And she said, first of all, she said, I was like, I'm not with Rod anymore. Who's going to give me a mantra? And Indu said, this is why Indu is forever a friend. You've been feasting on his mantras. It's time for a fast. You are the mantra. You already are the goddess. So when we open our heart to the masculine, we don't need, guys, a guru. We don't need a husband. We don't need men. And guess what? When we do that, you are irresistible to them. And they come to you like flies to honey. I really do know this. When I turned off my Bumble account, just to practice, I love Bumble. I think it's a good thing. You should be on it to find somebody. It's not a bad thing. But when I turned it off and I really got serious about the divine masculine coming into me, fill me, be with me, heal me, and I began to actually do a practice that I'm going to share with you guys today. The men are showing up left and right, but you will attract the kind of man, and if you're in a relationship with a man now, he will start to become more of what you want him to be when he doesn't feel the pressure of being your lost daddy that you've always secretly longed for. So we'll talk about that more tomorrow. Don't let me get ahead of myself. Okay, so put a pin in that. Anybody feel like they may need to heal their relationship with men? Raise their hand. Dad, brother, boyfriend, husband, boss, guru. So I'm gonna write this out so we just have it in our space. Any questions before we keep going? Thoughts, questions?
If a woman is more open to the masculine, the opposite for a man to see God as feminine.
It's a great question. So first of all, you can, everyone can seek the divine, as we know from Tantra in India, a million different ways, right? And sometimes there are going to be moments when I need God as the lover, like Rumi needed. And sometimes I'm going to need God as the mother. And sometimes I'm going to need God as the father. And so everybody can need those different ways of relating at any time, masculine, feminine, male, female. It's interesting because when a man, and men can also connect to the divine as the masculine, because what it enables them to do is also become the feminine. So there's something about being penetrated that is very powerful. The problem with that, just as a woman, it's a beautiful practice to let the loving, nurturing Earth Mother come up through you. So for me, it's been really healing to do this downward flow because I've done a lot of goddess work. But for a man, I'm so glad all this is being recorded so that everyone can hear me say these contentious things for time immemorial. But if you've ever dated a dude that's like been meditating a lot, they tend to over-feminize. So it can actually be really powerful for a man to actually work with the divine feminine as an entry point, because that enables him to become the masculine and to kind of like be out in the wild and bang a drum and like bow hunt. And so a man getting in touch with nature is super hot, just as us getting in touch with the divine masculine is super hot to men, actually. So it's a good question, because you can do everything every way. And inside of you, according to Tantra, most women have 2 parts masculine, 3 parts feminine. And she will be attracted to, and should be with, a man who has 3 parts masculine, 2 parts feminine. Marianne Williamson says, you're majoring in the feminine, you're minoring in the masculine. Everybody is. You just, depending on who you are. So there are aspects to both that we all need. So let's talk about Aphrodite. When we speak about Aphrodite being in the temple, and as the brilliant psychologist said, when the archetypes are constellated in the being, and versus Aphrodite in these streets or underground. A beautiful example of Aphrodite underground or in these streets is porn. Porn has absolutely nothing to do with with the Eros of Aphrodite that is held sacred in the temple. There may be by the way, like porn, I don't know the statistic, maybe one of you geekballs that likes to research statistics after class can look this up. Amory's like, that's me. Porn internet, it's like if you combine all the websites, it beats all the websites combined. Like the use of porn is such an addiction now. This is Aphrodite, and there may of that be 1% of porn that was made by some conscious 4th wave feminist that's somehow the story of true love. I haven't seen it. You can send it to me if you like. But like 99.999 is Aphrodite in the streets. So let's talk about that. Demonization, we lost the veneration that says love and sex and a woman or a man's passion for the sexuality, but just passion for life in general is separate from God. That sex and spirit cannot coexist, created the schism. So in our own body, in our own mind, in our own life, let's talk about what it looks like to have Aphrodite in her temple. Better said, what does it look like in terms of the benefits and boons and gifts of having an Aphrodite in her temple? But before we do that, we have to sort of put a little bit of a definition around what does it mean to have her in the temple? And what it means is that you have a relationship to some form of divinity that lives in you. And if you're like, dude, God, not my thing. You can use the word higher self, present moment, but that relationship is A, vital. B, that you offer up as a sacrifice. This is what it means to have her in the temple. You offer up as a sacrifice all of her gifts and talents. So in normal, everyday, at least me language, it means, oh, divine, holy mother and father, be in this relationship that I have with this man. Oh, divine, holy father, mother, be in this sexual act. And I'm being real with you. My dude and I pray together every time we are together. And I don't mean sexually, I mean together. When I started doing this God the Father shit that I'm going to teach you guys this week, I don't know if this is my forever and ever. I don't know if that's really my dharma. But the man that I've attracted, it was his idea to pray over me. That only came from Aphrodite being placed in the temple. So it means that I'm willing to give my body and my sexuality and my sensuality and my creativity and my gifts and even my children. I give them to God. So we're going to go a little bit deeper into what does it mean and how can I get this Aphrodite out of these streets and into church? So once I do that, what starts to happen? And you may think about your own experience and what you need and what you guys wrote down yesterday in terms of your heart and what you long for. The first thing that starts to go up, well, I don't know if the first thing, is you have more vitality. Love, beauty, spiritual renewal, creativity, and this is important too, procreativity, fertility. By the way, Aphrodite is ageless. Have you ever known that one girlfriend of yours that ain't that cute, but she thinks she is, and so she gets all the guys? That's Aphrodite. She knows she's fabulous, and you're like, she's kind of not, but she is. And all the men love her, right? That's Aphrodite. She knows she's fabulous. So that is ageless. She's ageless, she's timeless. All these goddesses are. They are beyond space and time. She inspires. We've already talked about that. And through her Eros power. Oh, this goes up. By the way, when I say that Aphrodite in the temple and these things go up, I don't just mean in you. It's also culturally and socially. So just think about our world. With the next one in particular. Relatedness. Community. A care for nature and children. And the disowned people in our society. Caring. We already said passionate. Just in general, the health of the body and the psyche. Eros as pathway to spirit, soul, God, whatever you'd like to place here. Oh, this is beneficial. An increase in intuition. Instincts become better. Homeostasis. And lastly, an increase in the value of being versus doing. Aphrodite just knows she's emanating fabulousness. She doesn't have to do anything. It's already there. That's why whenever I told the story of Indu, half of you were in tears. That's her. So what happens? Well, let me pause so I can drink tea. What happens? Let's hear from you. Is this resonating or thoughts, questions?
When you the value of just being, when I hear you say that, I think about how as healers and us doing the work that we're doing, that ability to just simply hold space and have that energy of the just being emanate and let other people know that, oh yeah, I can just be too, and have that be medicine.
Right. So if I repeat what you're saying, so our girls at home can hear. She was saying that the value of just being, holding space for other people to do the same.
I have some people in my life who I consider very creative, but not embodying any of this feminism. Is there a way to still have or am I just reading them?
I wouldn't call what I'm saying feminism, by the way.
I'm sorry, the feminine aspect.
All this feminine stuff.
I feel like they're heavily masculinized.
Yeah.
In every way of their life, not super aware, not super spiritual, like none of the qualities that we would associate with the feminine side.
How are they
Also just,
creative?
like artistically.
So what does that look like? Give an example of one friend you're thinking about in particular.
She does a lot of woodworking stuff. And she creates beautiful stuff. But in every other aspect of her life, I would say she relates a lot more to the masculine. In every single way.
Well, look, you can relate more to the masculine in some ways and still be creative. That men are very creative, right? So you can also have her expression asleep in different ways. So this woman has a creative outlet in her woodworking that maybe without she would go crazy, you know. So it doesn't mean that if you don't have this teaching that you don't do anything creative in your life. It's simply saying that as we increase this relationship to these things, all of these things grow, and we don't know this woman, right? But like then we would have to look at the health of her relationships, the health of her physical body, the health of her psyche, the health of her emotional body, the health of her womb. You know, there's a lot going on. So it's a good statement, because just because you're creative in one way doesn't mean she's living her fullness. Yeah.
When you were talking about are you talking, I guess my question about that is, what does that represent in men? Because I feel like it's typically men who are addicted to it. Like, what is that? How can you help them? Or like, what is?
So the question is, can we help our menfolk cure themselves of their porn addiction through the power of Shakti school? Yes, Barbara, you just put on one of those sweatshirts and you pull the hood over. Porn is the outward manifestation of the male denial of their own relationship to their inner feminine and masculine. So, first of all, we can't do anything to help them. What we can do is heal our own inner feminine and masculine. Because when Aphrodite is in the temple, first of all, a man with Aphrodite in the temple knows better. And if he doesn't, she's already walked. So there's a beautiful story called Les Estrada, whereby the women in the town long, long ago decided they were sick of men watching porn, actually war. But let's say they decided they were sick of men being warlike. And so the whole town said, look, if you don't stop fighting these wars, we aren't going to sleep with you anymore. And then the war ended in 24 hours. So we can't help them or heal them. What we can do is get clear, and we are going to do that this week, on who you are. Aphrodite, there's such a story I want to tell about this, but I want to move with Liz. I'll tell the short version, can I? Yes. This is the story of Aphrodite in her temple. And we all have her, to greater and lesser extents awake. Sometimes we throw her in the streets, and sometimes she's in the temple, right? It's not like black and white. So I had this beautiful moment for me of Aphrodite. And she shows up, and she's bigger than me. I don't have control over her. And I went on this ridiculous blind date, and I showed up, and the dude was, I like a beard, but this was something out of like a werewolf situation. And he was wearing like a holy t-shirt, not in a good hipster way. And when I came to the place that I was going to meet him, he was eating spicy hot wings with ranch dressing dripping in the beard.
You walked out, right?
So I'm just still like, no. I was like, okay, well, all right. So we sit down. How many of you heard this story? Those of you in Hawaii, we wrote a whole song about this. Kathy knows. So Kathy and I will send you the song later. But so I'm trying to be kind and compassionate, and I sit down, and the dude, I had not said one word more than hi. And for a good solid, 5 or 10 minutes, he just starts what I call verbally ejaculating on me, where a man is talking at you and completely unaware of how any of the words are affecting you at all. There's nothing wrong with someone talking at you, as long as they're getting some sort of cues as to whether it's landing or you're bored or you want to die. So the dude starts telling me, which, you know, that's really something women experience a lot with men, by the way, mansplaining and all this. So I'm used to it, whatever. But it was the content of it. And the content of it was unbelievable. No boundaries, just one after another. He started with, oh, I'm in a weird mood because I had a huge fight with my sister before I got here, and he went into that. And then he proceeded to tell me about all these little like babies that he'd had with all these different women that most of them left at the altar. I was like, oh my God, if I had a recording of this, I would be a millionaire somehow, right? And so around about, maybe it was like minute 10, I don't even remember, time ceased to exist. I hadn't said anything, not one word, and I'm just hearing about all this basically abuse of these. I'm like, I would love to hear what they think about you. But I didn't say anything. And I stood up, and as he's still blabbing, I'm standing because Aphrodite's standing. And I start to, move and he was like, what's going on? And I said to him, you haven't asked one thing about me. For the past 15 minutes, you've just talked at me. And this is as I'm leaving. And I said, as I left, I go, I don't want to waste my time or yours. This isn't going to work. And I left. And it felt amazing. Her energy, that archetype, is released in the body as emotion, as sensation, as power. Now, the end of the story is actually he texted me 2 seconds later, come back and pay for your drink.
No way!
And I didn't write back, but in my heart I wrote back, you don't know what I charge an hour. So listen to people, right? You got a free session. You actually owe me some money. So it's just a funny example of this relationship to men, right? We'll go into it a little bit more tomorrow, but like, what does it look like to have her in the temple? Porn would end if we all had Aphrodite in the temple, because you just don't put up with it. Yeah, Omri.
I had just a few thoughts. One, going back to the porn thing, because I think it's really interesting that porn is often violent.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it was a conversation with you, but I think the fact that in a lot of Abrahamic religions, they're cutting off the foreskin at infancy, which is causing like the first trauma in their sexual organ. So I think that has a lot to do with it. And then this thing about the sacred prostitute to me goes back to like every conversation I have with a girlfriend who's like, I'm a feminist, but all of my sexual fantasies are of me being ravaged or a prostitute or just really, really wanted in like a dirty, awful way that's considered unfeminist. And it's this, it's like, you want to be worshipped. Yeah. So for those of you at home, Anne-Marie's saying that there may be, and I will take credit, I remember the time I told you this. Yeah. Men, in the Abrahamic religions, their foreskin is taken from them as a baby. And so you have this if you want to watch, I haven't done it because I don't need to, but if you want to watch a video of it, they're online to show how traumatic it is for a baby to be circumcised. And so their first relationship, talk about men are suffering as much or more than we are. The first relationship that they have to their sexual organ is one of great violence when they had no choice.
They're strapped down.
And then the second thing she said was that it's so funny because I have the same experience with all these very awakened, powerful feminist sort of women being like, I just want my man to like throw me on the bed. And so that's also the inheritance of earlier forms of feminism, whereby a woman was taught to change the way that we raise the masculine. So before, you raised a man to be a man. And then you had like the 60s and flower power and the 70s. And now all these moms that were, my mom's generation were like, no, raise your boys to be sensitive. And you have this phenomenon of mother coddling. Yeah. We'll go into that later. So then you have all these boys that at the age of puberty, I'm going to say it, and again, I'm saying man and woman, but we all know it's gray. But in general, a man's greatest gift is to feel that his thoughts are respected and sacred by the feminine. That's why it's so much better to say to your man, well, what do you think you're going to do about that? They get hard. What do you think about that? Not, well, how do you feel about that? Right? And you get that whole Mars-Venus thing where the women are like, he never talks about his feelings. Good, because as soon as he does, your pussy's not going to be wet. So this mother coddling, a good way of working with the male is as soon as he hits puberty, the mother has to start letting him go, especially around his emotional reality. Appropriate conversation between a mother to her 14 or 15-year-old is, what do you think about that, sweetie? Because what you're training that man to be able to do is to value his own inner masculine. So this is why I think now, like, our generation is like, oh my God, these men are wimps with their skinny jeans. Yeah. You know, like, get a freaking lumberjack. That is why lumberjacks became a thing in opposition to this phenomenon. If you don't know about this, Google lumbersexual. Why do you think every dude now has a beard? And a plaid shirt. And none of them know how to chop wood, but we love it, right? So the counterpart to that is a man's greatest longing is to be his thoughts to be cherished. A woman's greatest longing is that, I'm getting chills, that the men in her life, you guys, it can be our dad first, and most of us didn't get it. I certainly didn't. That the man in your life holds your feelings as sacred. Well, how do you feel about that, sweetie? Well, rather what they normally do, which is, let's not talk about your feelings anymore. Let me just fix it.
Yeah, solution.
And we're like, no solution. I just want to talk about it and feel about it. So we have to do that for ourselves first. So let's get through this piece. Then we're going to move. Then we're going to do a meditation. And then this afternoon, we're going to go in. Do y'all like this stuff? Is it cool? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I see you. Very interested. The nervous system talk had a very different vibe. Yeah, Roberta. Yeah.
So, what is your impression of this trend of self-made porn?
We're back to the porn. What do I think about everyone at home? Self-made porn is gone. I mean, I don't know if I have the end-all be-all thoughts on reality, but for me, and it is a good question because it brings us back to this idea of Aphrodite in the temple. And so here's what Douglas Brooks, this beautiful tantric philosopher, scholar, says about it. He says, when our sexuality is between two people in a consensual way and held as consecrated, which is why my dude and I pray together, because it's like, hey, why don't we bring the divine into this relationship? Then anything goes. As long as it's consensual and within the boundaries of what that particular dyad of people have agreed to. That, I would say, is up to you, right? Like if Roberta's like, I'm asking for a friend, but so let's come back to men and porn tomorrow, later today. So let's talk about what it looks like when Aphrodite is thrown out of the temple. And I think that will be a good place to stop. And Liz is going to lead us through a very, I'm sure, inspired practice now. And then we're going to do a meditation and a journaling. So our creativity wanes. Modern malaise of continual states of anxiety and depression. The senses, and we talked about this yesterday, the senses actually become dull. or deadened or turned off completely. And that really is the overuse of screens is a huge problem for Aphrodite, who relies on her sensory realm. Oh, how about this? You may be wondering, where does all this come from? And where all this chart comes from is a lot of research on Aphrodite and the Sacred Prostitute that I've been doing lately. So this isn't like owned by anyone, if you want to know. This is what I've uncovered. And this one word, unworthy, many of you mentioned some things around this. This is a lack of confidence. And you can appear very confident, and then in certain situations or relationships, a different part of you shows up. Anybody? Yeah. So when Aphrodite has been thrown out of the temple, when she comes particularly into the relationship to the masculine, and that could be a man, or it could be your relationship to your career, you feel like you aren't good enough. And this unworthy piece also expresses as a sense of abandonment. So I'm not worthy, something's wrong with me, whether that be I'm not smart enough, my body doesn't look right, I am not this, that, and whatever enough. Confidence things. And if I just do X, Y, and Z, then I will be. That is Aphrodite on these streets. Or I am going to be abandoned by the masculine, whether that be a man or my boss, or I'm going to be left alone. So this feeling of aloneness is a sign that your Aphrodite's out in the streets. And by the way, you may be in a relationship, or you may not feel like you have this abandonment thing, but what I would tell you is, in some women, like myself, it manifests as, oh my God, like, are you gonna leave me? Like, tell me that you love me. Like, are we in a committed relationship? I know we just met, but like, maybe this is called neediness. Neediness and desperation is a sign of Aphrodite out on these streets. And it's so not a turn on for them. I've had many opportunities to find that out. And I can say that I can say that in front of you because I'm aware of it. And as soon as you start to become aware of it, that wounded little girl, that Aphrodite in the streets, doesn't get to run my relationship anymore. Well, she's there, and we may have to mourn and do some work around it. So in some of you, when you relate to a man, be it your father, be it your boyfriend, be it your boss, be it your guru, the masculine, there's a sense of I'm going to be left. Because Aphrodite's been left on a global scale. Now, some of you will be like, well, I never feel like my man's going to leave me. He would never do that. I've never had that karma in my life. It's just Katie Silcox and these softies in the room. Let me tell you what it looks like in other women. This is, I'm not going out on any dates. I don't need a man. It happens a lot in women who've been through it. Either abuse when they were younger, or a couple bad divorces, or one. And then they get into their 40s and their 50s and they're just like, you know what? I am in my post-man era. I'm done. I'm done with these men. Or it manifests in many of us who are like, I'm so freaking done with these men. And it's so everywhere right now, this feeling of being so done with these men. And that is, part of it is good, but if we just hashtag Me Too and hate them, we haven't healed the wound in the inner world of our own being. So what it looks like then is, I'm going to not go out with men. I'm going to divorce men and become a lesbian. And if you are a lesbian, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about women that are not lesbians, that are like, I really need love. And I'm done with them. And if you are that, it's valid. It's totally valid. But it still doesn't heal the wounded inner one. So you abandon before he can. And when you're needy and desperate, well, you know that I don't want you to abandon me, so I'm going to come close to you, blah, blah, blah. You abandon you. So then you think, I've abandoned me. Aphrodite is not alive in me. I've already abandoned me. Why wouldn't he? So it's two ways of the same thing going on. So interesting, right? Unloved, abandoned, unworthy, lack of confidence. Oh, here's a fun one. The unethical, let's say slut. I know that word, I'm using it intentionally. That word is kind of like the word bitch or cunt. You can reappropriate these words and give them new life and you could call it the sacred slut, and we're on the same page, but I'm using it in a different way. I'm talking about the part of you that knows, that maybe not doesn't even know, that has abandoned her own deepest longing and is now using her sexuality to get her needs met. I'm something of a connoisseur of this one as well, right? I know that I'm very sexy. That's Aphrodite. But now I also know that I now know, but at the time I didn't. I'm also a wounded little girl that didn't have a father. So I'm going to use my sexuality that I know is a power. Young women know it. Right? I'm going to use that to manipulate you and control you to get my needs met. Or I'm going to just be straight up slutty. And I'm so wounded that I get off on and I get a certain charge from the addiction of stealing another woman's man. If you are sleeping with a married man, Aphrodite is not in the temple. I don't care how tantric your sex is or how much whatever, you are actually harming another sister. So figure that out, and then, but just some examples. You guys can think of your own, the way we have and do misuse our sexuality because we know that we can control them with it for very short periods of time. Right? And if a man, by the way, if a man is in a relationship with an Aphrodite who's out of her temple, who's either needy or using her sexuality in this way, a man who is in his masculine won't stay. And if he's in his wounded masculine, guess what he'll do? Stay with you because you go wound to wound. And we'll talk more about this later. So, misuse or unethical use. Notice I'm not telling you, except for one thing, of don't sleep with your sister's man. And you're the one who decides what the ethic is for you. Like going back to what Roberta asked about. What is my ethical realm? This is your decision. But if you're sleeping with another girl's man, you're out of the temple. That's sort of the only rule. Right? It's a disowning of Aphrodite completely. Because Aphrodite doesn't need that. All right, so sex is a manipulation weapon. There is a sense, we've talked about it, but I'll just write it again. Anger at the man, the masculine. Oh, I love this one. I call it, your inner masculine is cock blocking other men. Okay, so we'll call it inner cock blocking. Now, what is that? This is going back to the armor, right? I've been hurt. I've gone out on too many Tinder dates where he had blue cheese on his beard. I am disgusted with men for many reasons, from blue cheese to terrible abuse. It's very real. And because of that, I'm going to form this armor whereby my inner masculine feels that he must protect my inner feminine. So if a good man does show up, I'm going to cock block him before he can actually come into my sphere. This is also Aphrodite out of the temple. I mean, my God, how many of us have dated like a good guy and been like, no, I don't know. And then you're dating a douchebag or an asshole that will abandon you, and all your girlfriends and sisters are like, I don't think so. And you're like, I can't get enough of him. So sometimes we'll cock block the actual good guy because we're actually scared. Something to think about. The dichotomy of slut and ice queen is another way of thinking about it. And they're both manifestations of her being out of the temple. And then all of our addictions, all of the ways that we manipulate and control and sedate and suppress, all of our addictions
are really Aphrodite, and men and women, out of the temple. Why? Because when I am experiencing my life as joy and pleasure and my body, all of those things, my pleasure is endogenous. There's a natural, titrated, healthy amount of the chemicals that make me feel good in my body. And sometimes I don't feel good, and that's a part of it. But there's a dance of that. When I am not in that pleasure place on a regular basis, that's why Ayurveda speaks so much to if you're eating too many sweets, it's because you don't have sweetness in your life. You know, alcohol is just hot, sweet, fiery water. If you drink a lot of wine, you are lacking. Now, if you drink a glass in the temple, that's different. If you have a donut in the temple, it's different. And the difference between anything, whether it be sex or a donut or a glass of wine, is if you're making the conscious decision, it's in the temple. If you're doing it to avoid your feelings and your body, she's out of the temple. It's that easy. So there's no rules. It's are you doing it as a choice consciously, or are you doing it as a way of avoiding your feelings, which is her? I thought before you guys came, I wonder if I should talk about all this Aphrodite sexy stuff, and I wonder if they would rather talk about, for me now, boring Ayurvedic daily routines. I think you are happy to hear it. So
I'm super happy to hear it, because I feel too that like so much of Aphrodite in the street sometimes to me looks like Athena. And then I get like, then it's confusing, like, because I've definitely been experiencing that, and then I'm like, well, I gotta push myself harder, I gotta do more, and the opposite is true, have to go inward. So that's
I think what I want to ask you is, do you mean it's masked as Athena, meaning what it means to be an empowered woman is Athena? Yes. What it means to be an empowered woman is Athena is very much not Aphrodite. No.
But they're both empowered.
Yeah, and we need both of them. And this isn't a workshop on Athena, but it could be. It would be maybe a little bit more like a career building. I don't teach that, right? But there are women who need Athena.
Sometimes it feels like you're saying you have to do all the work that we're doing to put Aphrodite back in the temple. So she's going to be out in the streets until we do all this work. But sometimes I feel like I kind of flip in between the both without doing all the work in between. So I think I'm a little bit confused.
It's the same thing that millions of spiritual practitioners have been arguing about for millennia. And that is, if everything is love and God, then why do I have to do any of this shit? And you are flipping back and forth. We all are. There are parts where you don't have to work on it. But I would say that even the word work, it's almost like she's the opposite of that, right? The trying is like getting in the way of her. So I don't love the word work, but there is a certain amount of, you guys got on a plane or got in your car and came here. That's work. Like, you left your lives, that's work.
And an openness.
Yeah, and an openness. And the work is what we're doing right now, which is talking about it and journaling about it and thinking about it. And for a lot of us, we may need to get a therapist about it. And there is a certain amount of work that definitely is required, and just being aware of it.
So maybe there's a certain level of you stay within the temple longer, the more you're open to the divine masculine in you, and some of these things are being healed. You stay in it longer. You don't like permanently stay Aphrodite in the temple, but you can reside there more often.
And maybe permanently at some point you are fully in the temple. I want to think that that's possible. Yeah, Lauren?
The way I'm responding to that question, thinking a little bit, because you could wake up in the morning and just feel like really good, your body feels good, your spirit feels good, the sun is shining, you have really nice things planned for the day, go outside, you just feel amazing, you have like the soundtrack playing in your head, it's actually a movie. So you're feeling like strong in the temple. Also, you know, everything. You're all.
You're everything.
You're everything. And then, but good, feeling really centered. And then you come to a traffic light and car next to you, like a really beautiful, cool Mercedes convertible, is the guy that you love at some point, and he's with like a friend of yours from high school, who whatever. And then they
Let's call her Tina.
So like in that moment, it's like our humanity, right? Like we are Aphrodite, we are Athena, we're the whole thing. But in that moment, the human condition is a reckoning.
Yeah.
Like, where am I? What resources? What self-love? What awareness? What knowledge? What strength do I have that I can summon that I don't fall the hell apart?
Yeah.
And the soundtrack that was playing 2 minutes ago doesn't turn into like Ryan's song, kind of, you know, like, what can I do? So, but I think the work is like the muscle. You know, like we go to the gym and we haven't been working out at all, we only can lift the 2 pounds. And then if we really work out, we are so what's the resilience muscle? What's the self-love muscle? What's my Aphrodite muscle? How strong is it? And just to go back in. So the work isn't because you need to do it all the time to be. It's just there are moments that's how I feel. There are moments that just call on us.
Thank you. Beautifully said. Yeah, Erin.
I think it goes to it like you said. One of our mantras is "I'm available," and there's a thing with the whole Aphrodite thing. Like, yes, there's work you have to do, but it's also just allowing yourself to be available. Like, I think in this like new agey like yoga world, we like sometimes get in this habit, or I have, of trying to fix myself. Like, there's something wrong with me. What's wrong with me? Let me do all these things to like get better. But like really, like there's work to do, but like we're already whole. Like if we let God in, we're already who we need to be. We just can't see it. We have a blind spot. So if we can show up and say, I'm available, and sometimes, you know, my ex-boyfriend's gonna like show up in the coffee shop and then I have to do the work, but I'm available to be present with that work. I allow it to come in. I think that's when things start to change, when you like stop trying to fix yourself and like just love yourself more.
Well,
that's not
and I think that what Arian's speaking to is something I haven't mentioned. It's this concept of grace. And when you're open and available, the grace flows to you. It's a gift. You can't work for it. You can't work hard enough, but you can be ready for it and open to it. So I know you guys have lots of thoughts and questions, and now we're like in a new space together, and we're going to continue. But I want to give the brilliant Liz time, and I want to give Aphrodite time in you through your body. So, but I want to do one thing while we're in this moment together. Flip to your journal, grab it if you don't have it. If you're about to go to the bathroom, just wait 2 seconds. Now, I cannot impress upon you enough the importance of the following. Do not think this. These things are going to come instantaneously, and I want you to write it down. And you're going to have 5 seconds, or maybe 15. But that's it. I want you to fill in the blank to the following sentence with 3 words. 3 words, or if it's a little phrase, okay. 3 words or phrases. They're going to come to you quickly. And I want you to fill in the blank. The statement is, men are 3 things.
Hote phul apon sikhe hote phul